And just so you don't get the idea that this is a male-dominated industry, this is a very unusual collection of people. Normally, we're about 60 to 65% women, and the rest are men. And in this case, we've got 20% women and 80% men. So that's not the reality in the disability sector. So in case you're thinking of a career, keep that in mind. So I am from the United States, and I've been living here for longer than most of you, I would say, maybe even longer than you guys. You're under 40? It's amazing to think about it. और मुझे हिंदी भी आती है, लेकिन I won't bore you with my Hindi. हमारी हिंदी बहुत खराब है, बहुत सारी गलतियाँ करती हूँ, लेकिन बोल सकती हूँ. I'm going to begin with telling you just a little bit about the foundation and why it started and what we do. We've got a very short video which kind of covers everything, but just before we get into the video, I want to tell you the personal story of why I started it back in 1994, when a lot of you were probably not born. How many of you were born in 1994? Raise your hand if you were born in 1994. You guys, I'm sure you were born in 1994. Raise your hands. You were born in 1994. The rest of you weren't even born when we started the Latika Roy Foundation. So that makes me feel really good that this is an institution which is older than just about everybody in this room. So quite exciting for us to be around for that long. So I started the foundation for my own daughter, Moy Moy, whom Sir has already spoken about. My husband and I had two homemade children, Anand and Kathleen, and we wanted to adopt a baby. So our third baby, Moy Moy, was a child that we adopted. And Moy Moy had severe disabilities. By the time she was 5 years old, she was in a normal school, but we realized that that wasn't working for her, so we decided that we would begin the Latika Roy Foundation. And as soon as we started the school, we were deluged with other children, just like Moy Moy, who needed a special environment, an institutional kind of an approach that would make it easier for them to learn and to grow and to become the people that they could be. Now we are thinking differently about that. I think the country has moved a great deal forward, and we understand much more about disability. Now we know that special schools, special environments are really not the way to go. The way to go is for our students to be part of the mainstream, to come to places like Graphic Era, to go to schools like the DAV schools, the Guru Ram Rai schools, St. Joseph's, Anne Mary, where my other children went. But in those days, we weren't ready for that. But now what we're doing in the Latika Roy Foundation is moving more and more in the direction of full inclusion. Our kids should be studying along with you, and they shouldn't be kept in a special, isolated kind of an environment. So that's part of what we're going to be talking about in the next hour or so. But I'm going to begin with a little video, if you could start the ecosystem to empower children with disabilities, and just have a look at that. A little lower volume, please. We need some volume, but yeah.
The Latika Roy Foundation started in 1994 as a small special education center in Dehradun, capital of Uttarakhand in northern India. While it began with just 2 students who had cerebral palsy, it rapidly expanded to accommodate children with very diverse needs, including children with autism, Down syndrome, speech and language impairments, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorders. The foundation has come to be known for its comprehensive model that offers an ecosystem of services addressing the needs of children with disabilities and their families. At present, they run a range of services which include a diagnostics and assessment center and an early intervention center. Gupwara, which was established under a public-private partnership between the government of Uttarakhand and the Latika Roy Foundation, is a diagnostic center which provides intensive assessment, home plans, training and information for families of children with disabilities. Just as its name implies, Balloon in Hindi, the center aims to be affordable and accessible to families across the state.
गुब्बारा में हमारे पास एक डेवलपमेंटल असेसमेंट करने के लिए एक प्रोफेशनल टीम रहती है जिसमें कि साइकोलॉजिस्ट, एक स्पेशल एजुकेटर, फिजियोथेरेपिस्ट, कम्युनिकेशन स्पेशलिस्ट सब लोग मिलके बच्चों का अर्ली डेवलपमेंटल असेसमेंट करते हैं। हम लोग ये फाइंड आउट करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि बच्चों को एग्जैक्टली चैलेंजेस क्या आ रहे हैं उनके डेवलपमेंट में। बेसिक आइडिया इज टू फाइंड आउट एरियाज इन व्हिच द चाइल्ड इज नॉट डूइंग एज एप्रोप्रिएटली, ताकि हम लोग उन एरियाज के बारे में उनके पेरेंट्स को बता पाएं कि उन एरियाज में डेवलपमेंट के लिए वो अपने बच्चों की मदद कैसे करें।
The foundation's continued success can be attributed to its innovative methods to reach families, whether it is at the centers, in the community, or in their own homes.
We have a very active awareness campaign where we're working in the community to create awareness and understanding and acceptance of differences. We think that the community is tolerant and accepting, but only when they know that the problem exists.
Through its network of village health workers, doctors, government officials and students, the foundation manages to cover neighboring peri-urban and rural blocks of surrounding districts of Dehradun, bringing assessment and intervention to families who find accessibility and distance a challenge.
So it's really a privilege for us to be able to meet people like you who are at the beginning of your education and thinking about careers. I'm sure many of you have already thought what you want to do, but lots of things change in the process of going to college, meeting new people, experiencing life in its many different forms. When I started my thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, I thought I was going to be a full-time writer. And then my life took a different turn when Moi Moi came into our family and I needed to start a school for her. And now I'm working in the field of disability. You never know what you know, you may meet somebody who completely turns you on to education and you decide you want to join Teach for India and work to improve the quality of education in government schools, for example. You may decide because somebody in your family has got some kind of a medical problem that you're suddenly interested in leukemia and you decide to go back and train as a doctor. You may think I can solve the problem of pollution and you decide to go into science or technology. There are so many things that happen. So don't think that just because you're studying whatever you're studying, how many are you guys are in the School of what? Commerce. So you don't have to go into business just because you're studying commerce. You don't have to do anything. Life is wide open for you, and you should keep that in mind. Keep your minds open, keep your hearts open, and let life teach you the lessons that it wants you to learn. We believe that anybody can develop what we call disabled mind. And disabled mind is a quality of thinking that allows you to respond to life in a different way. We're all kind of stuck in our grooves and we think this is the only way to be, but there are so many options for you. I want to tell you a little bit about disabled mind. But first I want to ask you a couple of questions. How do you see your own life? When you think about yourself as part of this great big world that we all inhabit, how do you see your role? How do you see your opportunities? A lot of people think of their life like this, like a tightrope walk. And every step you take is fraught with danger. That if you make a mistake, you will fall, you will never be able to recover. If you don't do well in the board exam, you'll never get into a good college. If you don't get into a good college, you won't get a good job. If you don't get a good job, you're going to have a terrible life. That's a kind of way of thinking. And a lot of people think that way right from the very beginning. When their first child is born, they start saving money for the kid's college education or for marriage. I'm sure many of your parents did just that because they have to be planning. They have to be controlling everything all the time. And they believe that if they get it wrong, there's no hope. Other people think about life like this. We call it a trust fall. And the belief there is that, yeah, things may go wrong. There may be problems, but there's going to be a community that's going to catch me. My friends, my family, all of the relationships that I have developed, those are going to jump in and save me. And anybody who thinks this way knows that you can't always be the person who's falling and people are there to catch you. Sometimes you have to be the one who does the catching. You have to be there for other people as well. And that's kind of the way I think about life, that I believe that we can make mistakes, we can try new things, we can take risks, we can fail, and we can get up again. And this is part of disabled mind. Dr. Martin Luther King, everybody's heard of Dr. Martin Luther King? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, so if you haven't heard of Dr. Martin Luther King, he was one of our greatest leaders in the United States. He was the leader of the civil rights movement, and he took his inspiration from Gandhiji. And he organized massive, very successful, nonviolent protests among Black people who were being denied their rights systematically in the United States. One of the things he said, and I love this quote, is whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality, that what one person does affects everybody else. And this is true for countries as well as for individuals. You only have to think about that little virus in Wuhan, China, a city most of us had never even heard of until COVID-19 happened. To think about the impact that that one little virus has had on the entire world. I mean, people have lost their lives, people have lost their loved ones, they have suffered enormous economic losses all over the world. Nobody was spared the impact of COVID-19. So we can never say that I'm just one small person. What I do doesn't make any difference, for good or for bad. And think about someone like Adolf Hitler and the terrible impact he had on his country and on the world by his determination to spread hatred, to spread division, to create differences among people. The first people that Adolf Hitler went after were disabled people. Disabled children were the first ones that were targeted for extermination. And then he began with Jews, and then he went to gypsies, and then he went to Catholics, and there was a long list of people. But the main thing that he was doing was spreading hatred and division. And he was one person, but look at the impact he had on Germany and on the rest of the world. So don't think that your career choice is a small thing only affecting you and your family. It actually has ripple effects and can affect the entire world. So again, I'm going to ask you now, what do you want to do with your life? I get people coming into our office all the time looking for jobs. And I ask them, what do you want to do? What are you excited about? What turns you on? What do you think would be really good for you? And they usually just look at me blankly and they say, I just want a job. And I know that's a reality. Many people just want a job. But you guys are the privileged ones. You are in a really beautiful university. Look at this place. I mean, purple chairs. Who has purple chairs to sit on? I think this is really an incredible place. We went on a tour. We saw the labs. We saw the design area, the beautiful murals people have painted, that gorgeous amphitheater downstairs. This is a really incredible university, and you people have so many opportunities. So think about really and truly what you want to do for the world, for yourselves, for your families, but think about the impact that you want to have, how you want to make a difference in the world, because the world really needs some help right now. So disabled mind is that quality of thinking that allows us to see beyond what is right in front of us. We are conditioned by our environment to see the trappings, to see what are people wearing, what language do they speak, what color is their skin, what religion do they believe in, what caste do they belong to. Those things we think are so important are actually completely irrelevant if you really think about it. Now, I am a good example of having broken some of those barriers. I grew up in the United States, Catholic, speaking only English. I married a Hindu from India, have come here to live, and have learned to speak Hindi. My parents never would have planned that marriage, and Ravi's parents would never have planned that marriage. But here we are, and we've got these wonderful children, and we have done something with our lives that we think is meaningful. Because we went beyond those stereotypes. We said, we're capable of doing anything we want. And I want each one of you, if you go away with nothing else from this presentation, to think beyond the narrow confines of the career choices that people have decided for you. I'm sure your parents have put a lot of pressure on you. They've put a lot of money into your educations. They've saved up so you can come here, only to have you say, well, actually, I think I'd rather go and work in a slum in Mumbai and make a difference there. Maybe you'll do that. You never know. My husband went to IIT, and his parents had high hopes for him that he was going to be an engineer and make a fortune and bring the family up from middle class to upper middle class. And Ravi decided he was going to spend his life working for India's villages. Vikas ka kaam karna chahta tha. So anything is possible, and he's done some amazing things by opting out of his IIT career. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not sabotaging you guys and your values for these kids, but I just think you people have got so much ahead of you, and I hope you'll think about it. Disabled mind is what it is that allows us to ask these kinds of questions. And we've learned it from our children. I've learned that a kid that looks like this, who has cerebral palsy, has a visual problem, has got so much going on inside of her, and it's never seen. When people looked at Moi Moi, my daughter, they would see somebody who couldn't talk, who couldn't walk, who ate through a pipe that went into her tummy, and yet inspired thousands and thousands of people. A person who was completely nonverbal, and yet changed the course of lives for all of us. We're all working in the Latika Roy Foundation because of Moi Moi. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Moi Moi. A person who couldn't speak, who couldn't walk. So we never take anybody for granted when we have disabled mind. The question we ask when we see somebody who's got a difficulty is, what is holding you back? What are the barriers that our society has put in your way that make it impossible for you to be the person that you want to be? And me, how can I remove them? What can I do to make your path easier? How can I break that wall down so you can get to where you need to go? Sorry. So say you decide you want to go into education. You look at a classroom like this one, and many of those children are going to fail. They're going to graduate from class 5 not knowing how to do simple arithmetic because they're not getting a good education there. Now, the teacher might blame the child if she doesn't have disabled mind. The teacher might say, a kid's lazy, a kid just doesn't want to work, a kid was born stupid. With disabled mind, you start to ask other questions. You say, can the children see? 30% of these children should be wearing glasses. I look around in this room and I'm seeing 30% of you are wearing glasses. That's because you come from families that have looked into your vision. They've tested your eyes when you were little and you got your glasses at the right time. 30% of these children should be wearing glasses too, and not one of them is. So a teacher with disabled mind will ask, can the kids see the board? There are children in this classroom who have an undiagnosed hearing problem. The teacher will say, can they hear? If she's got disabled mind. There are so many children in that classroom who have attention problems. They can't follow what she's saying. They can't manage to keep their minds on what she's saying long enough to take it in. A good teacher with disabled mind will ask that question. So that's just one way that disability can improve performance in any career. Look at the Indian Administrative Service. Anybody here thinking they would like to try out for the IAS? Raise your hand if you're thinking like that. Go ahead, don't be shy. You are? You'll get there. Very good. Anybody else got that kind of an ambition? Yeah, you do. Very good, very good. I hope you make it. And I hope that you keep the idea of disabled mind if you get into the IAS. Because there is nothing that an IAS officer doesn't need disabled mind for. If they're working on water, if they're working on poverty alleviation, if they're working on mass transport, if they're working in agriculture, there are disabled people who need the same services that anybody else does, but they need them in a little different way. That IAS officer, that one right there, she actually has done amazing work in Mizoram on the Anganwadi program. The Anganwadi program is absolutely where we find most disabled children. Little kids at the age of 1 and 2 and 3, we can spot those kids if we train the Anganwadi workers, and those children can get the early intervention that they need. And it's an IAS officer with disabled mind who's going to make that happen. Coding and programming, anybody thinking about that as a career option? You guys are commerce people, but you can still do coding and programming. You know what? How many of you use text messaging? All of you. Now the hands are going up. Very good. You know who invented text messaging? Who it was invented for? It was invented for deaf people because we all had phones, but they couldn't use them, right? So some very clever engineers in Finland developed the concept of text messaging. And then deaf people were off and away, and now we're all using it because it was a benefit that everybody can take advantage of. So there's so much to do in coding and programming for disabled people. We use so many things that were actually created for disabled people, but are a regular part of our lives now. Here's your thing, right? Corporate world. You guys are going to go into sales and marketing and business offices. There's such a need for disabled mind in the corporate world. Disabled people buy things too. Disabled people are 15% of the population worldwide, including in India. That is a huge market that the corporate world is pretty much unaware of. They don't really cater to them. They don't think, disabled people might like to travel. Disabled people might like to go to a movie. They might like to come into this room. How are they going to come into this room with the steps over there? Does that have a ramp on that side? No. Okay, so we've got a problem right here in this room. And if you're in the corporate world, in the business sector, you will realize that you've got to get your buildings accessible so that disabled people can use them. And that's what will bring them into the mainstream. If you want to go into engineering or design, there's a role for disabled mind there too. Look at this traffic. You all know where this is, right? At Bindal. And it's chaos. Now think of a person with a disability trying to cross that street. Whether it's somebody who's deaf and can't hear the horns, whether it's somebody who has a locomotor disability in a wheelchair or on crutches, say. You know how fast you have to get across the street if you're going to get there alive, right? Because these people don't stop. If you are an engineer who's looking at traffic control, or a designer who's looking at vehicles and how we can automate them, how we can adapt them so that anybody can use it, this is an area where there is a job for people who have disabled mind. The leisure industry is full of possibilities for people who have disabled mind, who think about the 15% of the population who also want to go into restaurants and parks and do all the fun things that life is full of. So literally, any career at all, anything you ask me, I can tell you a disability angle to it. Fashion design. People with cerebral palsy, for example, need special clothing because it's very hard for them to move their arms sometimes. You know, they'll be like this, and if you give them something that they have to put their arm into a sleeve in the normal way, it'll be really tough for them. Fashion designers are working on clothing adaptations that make it easy for people to get dressed. Literally, there is no career that doesn't have a disability perspective. So when you get into whatever you do, pay attention to the details of it. Ask yourself, how can this career that I'm involved in serve the needs of the entire population, not just the one I'm most familiar with? Imagine all the possibilities that are now open to you. The sky is the limit. And imagine the happiness it's going to bring, not only to the people who are suddenly being catered to, but to you, because you are going to be doing something totally different, something remarkable, something that nobody else has ever done before. So begin to see from the heart, begin to look at the person in front of you as more than just the trappings that surround them. Acquire that disabled mind that I've been talking about, and then begin to use it. Thank you. Oops, I missed those are my grandchildren, and they're the ones that I'm doing everything for now. I'm trying to build a better world so that they can grow up in a place that is okay to be whoever you are. And Jai Hind.